and our dear friend, our brother Scott Ritter is here with us. Welcome, Max.
Thanks for having me.
I want to start, Scott, with Donald Trump's visit to China. But before getting there, we may start with Benjamin Netanyahu's latest interview on 60 Minutes. When he was asked about how do you see the future of the war in the Middle East, he said, we are months away from putting an end to the war. And what does it mean when he says months away, and who's gonna fight for him, and what is the current situation with the fight in the Middle East?
Benjamin Netanyahu telling you you're months away from something. I think you have to be careful, because I think for the last 30 years he's been telling us that we're a few years away or months away from Iran having a nuclear bomb. So apparently his relationship with the calendar is very loose. I don't really give a damn what Benjamin Netanyahu says, because he's irrelevant nowadays. We're talking about a situation where the United States no longer possesses the capacity to wage meaningful armed conflict against Iran in a conventional manner. The President Trump is running up against some very hard realities that he may be dismissive of it on the White House lawn when he says, I don't care about the economic cost of the American people. It's about the Iranian nuclear bomb. Well, there is no Iranian nuclear bomb, but there is a huge economic cost to the American people, which will manifest itself politically to the detriment of the president. And Benjamin Netanyahu needs to understand, as most Israelis do, that the moment you screw around with the American economy and you're on the wrong side of that equation, as in you're the one responsible for the downward slide and you're not affiliated with the upward recovery, you're the problem, not the solution. And right now, Israel is very much the problem, very much the problem. Israel can do nothing without the United States. And right now, we're looking at Israel's support in the United States plummeting. 60% of the American population apparently is not inclined to be favorably supportive of Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu just slightly, 59%. But I think the margin of error might put him over on either, But the point is, no one cares what he says anymore because his words are irrelevant. I mean, yes, Israel is a troublemaker. Yes, Israel will cause trouble. But the idea that Israel is now the driver in the seat, no. And I would also, you brought up China, and now you brought up Israel. You and I think others understand the role Israel played in fomenting this conflict. Netanyahu and his Mossad director went to the White House on February 11th and sold the president a bill of goods. And there we are. Now we're at war. The president now is holding a bag of crap. I mean, all the honey and roses that are supposed to come out of this conflict, no, it's turned into be just 100% cat shit, and it smells horrible. And the president doesn't know what to do. Israel's not the solution. It's the problem now. And Netanyahu's out of the driver's seat. But the other thing people need to realize is that there was a larger agenda at play here than just a greater Israel. Yes, that appeases a certain Zionistic element that has seized control of American foreign policy making and, has heavy influence in the deep state. But Trump is playing a bigger game, a game of global domination. I mean, it's sort of hilarious now to look back on all the lies he told us when he ran for office. Everything he said was a lie. He wasn't seeking to redefine a relationship with the world where the rules-based international order was no longer the driver, that the United States would recognize that we live in a multipolar world. No, Trump was lying the entire time. He wants to dominate the entire globe. That's his persona. We should have known it. We know who this man is. We know that he's the biggest egomaniac in the world. He can never share anything with anybody. Donald Trump wants to be large and in charge. And what we're seeing with China is, the decapitation of Maduro in Venezuela was supposed to combine with the decapitation of Khamenei in Iran to create a situation where these two nations that were providing oil to China, one of the world's largest economies and a major competitor to the United States, by controlling the flow of energy to China, we were seeking to retard Chinese economic potential and create opportunities for us to, fill the void in the Pacific, especially. That's what this conflict was about. It was never about Iran's nuclear program at all. That was just the excuse that the president used to sell the war to the American public. And that excuse is wearing very thin right now because, at the end of the day, even though we don't demand evidence leading up to a war, once the war impacts our bottom line, we want evidence. And it appears that there is no evidence that Iran posed a threat. The president has a policy problem, a narrative problem. But he also has a larger geopolitical problem because the world that he was trying to create has come collapsing in on him. The effort to control the flow of energy to China has failed. I mean, yes, China is choked off, but he isn't going to China to dictate terms of the Chinese surrender, which was his original intent last month, which is why he had to cancel the trip. He's going to China basically to plead for help, to ask the Chinese, how do we get out of this? We together get out of this mess that we're in. And the Chinese, I think, will remind them that it's a mess you created, but we're here to help. And they'll try and find some way out. But, this isn't about Benjamin Netanyahu in the driver's seat. This is about Donald Trump's failed global vision, Scott Bessent's failed global vision. I mean, we keep talking about, Pete Hegseth, the necessity of Pete Hegseth's head to roll because of the incompetence of this military campaign. But the incompetence of Scott Bessent is playing out as well. This is a man who has consistently sought to use the energy markets to bring nations to their knees. He specifically said, we're going to bring Russia to its knees. How'd that work, Scott? Not too good, right? Yeah. And now he wants to bring China to its knees. Not working out too good, is it, Scott? And so the president, I think, is going to put his head on Bessent's head on the chopping block. He's getting just bad advice all around. But on Netanyahu, he's an aging, sick man who has no meaningful political support in Israel. He's holding on through the fabrication of security threats that have only brought harm to Israel. What problems has he solved? He hasn't solved Hamas. Just ask the IDF how it's going in Lebanon with Hezbollah. We blew up Hezbollah. We killed Nasrallah. We had the pager thing. We're so good. Wait a minute. Why are Israeli soldiers dying by the bushelful every day? Oh, because Hezbollah is alive and well in fighting and winning. They haven't solved the Syria problem. That is a very big issue. They have a new problem in the way of Turkey, ascendant. And then Iran was supposed to be decapitated, terminated. It's there. And its support for Hezbollah is growing. The linkage that was thought to have been broken when Syria collapsed has now been, reestablished. And Iran also has a very strong ally with Ansarallah in Yemen. It's not just the Strait of Hormuz Iran gets to choke off, but they can shut down the Bab el-Mandeb Strait as well anytime they want to. So it's not Netanyahu that's in the driver's seat. I think there's a Chinese professor out there talking about Israel winning the whole world. I think the guy's smoking dope because Israel's winning nothing right now. Their military has been exposed as having severe limitations. Air power was supposed to be the trump card for Israel. Well, the trump card in this conflict has been Iran's ballistic missile program, which apparently neither Israel nor the United States effectively retarded. The CIA is saying that they got up to 90% back up and running. Aragchi, who I believe more than the CIA, says it's 120%. And probably that number's gone up because he made that statement last week. What he's saying is we have reconstituted the totality of our ballistic missile force, and we've been building new missiles, so we're stronger today than we were when the conflict actually started. That tells me that Israel and the United States are on the losing end of this equation. The United States is now having a debate internally about what we got left. According to Senator Mark Kelly, we ain't got nothing left. That's according to the Pentagon classified briefing. Now, people are mad because he's telling the truth. They didn't want the truth to be out because they wanted to lie to the American people in the world and project a sense of strength that doesn't exist. But we don't have sufficient quantities of long-range standoff weapons. We burned through the arsenal. We're now unable to even pretend to think we can go to war with China. A war with Russia is out of the question, and we can't even sustain a meaningful campaign against Iran. If we start it up, we will run out of missiles. And Iran, like I said, 120%. We already proved we can't retard their capacity. They will be able to fire missiles all day long, all week long, all month long until every target they aim at is destroyed. we're run out of missile interceptors. Our production isn't going to catch up for years, let alone the time to make it meaningful here. So, again, I think Israel is finished as the prime driver of what's going on in the Middle East. The prime driver today is Iran. They control the narrative. They control everything, and they're the ones we should be listening to. 60 Minutes should be calling it Aragchi. That's the voice they need to listen to. Netanyahu, I spit on him.
Scott, when it comes to Lebanon, you've just mentioned, and I'm sure that you watched those two videos showing the FPV drones hitting, Iron Dome batteries. And Iron Dome was supposed to hit these drones, but it seems that they're not able to see or to hit these FPV drones. What is the problem with Iron Dome? We're not talking about the THAAD system or Patriot system. We're talking about Iron Dome dealing with rockets and drones.
Well, Iron Dome was supposed to deal with Iron Dome was created not to shoot down Scud missiles, but to shoot down Katyushkas and the homemade rockets that Hamas was firing. Basically, what both Hamas and Hezbollah would do is take these inexpensive, inaccurate rockets and flood the zone, and fired at an area and rain down on the ground, and some of them would hit, most of them wouldn't, but it was terrorism from the standpoint of the Israelis. Iron Dome was designed to eliminate that threat, to create an affordable means of shooting down these low-cost threats. Now, if you have a drone that flies into the field of view of Iron Dome's target acquisition radars, of course, they can be shot down too. And if you have, a larger missile come in and dispense multiple warheads that come in, Iron Dome can also, in theory, be effective there. Although I think the intercept rate is too high for the Iron Dome system to handle. You need other missiles to do that. And we don't have enough of those. But the FPV is coming in very low to the ground. And it comes in literally under the radar. And once it gets past that radar, as you see, they have free reign. The Hezbollah, I've been following this because I've been following drone warfare for some time now, both in Ukraine and in Russia, the way they fight there. Seeing what the United States is doing in terms of adapting to this reality. And so I watched the early Hezbollah drones with interest because, it takes a while to get used to operating a drone. The patience, it's like anything. Once you get a comfort level, the first time you fly a drone behind enemy lines, you're like, I got to act now. Something bad's going to happen. I got to act now. And what you have to cope with as a drone operator is you're going to lose drones because that's just happens. The Israelis have taken the Ukrainian, but because the FPV drones right now are fiber optic guided to get through electronic warfare jamming. And so, what the Ukrainians have done for some time now is to stretch the razor wire, barbed wire out, and then just have an automatic motor and it twirls. And as a FPV drone flies over, the fiber optic cable, of course, lags behind and droops. And as it flies over this wire, it gets caught up in there, it spins it up, and it'll break the wire, and then the drone will crash. So, the Israelis are doing this. So you're going to lose drones. That's just so the first thing you have to learn as an operator is if you're flying and the drone goes dead, call up another one. Start over. You're going to lose drones. So don't treat each drone as $1 million piece of equipment that has to deliver on the goods. The other thing is once you get there, don't panic. Search out your targets, prioritize your targets. You're there. The reason you're there is they don't have the ability to shoot you down. Take your time. The early Hezbollah FPV drones were marked by a sense of urgency. And so they would come in and literally dive at the first target they saw, bypassing other targets. What you see now is this maturity. It's almost as if they're mocking the Israelis. We're here. And it's a trick that the Ukrainians and the Russians play on each other. The the sound of the drone it has a terrorizing impact. And if you look at both videos from both sides, when they hear that, you got the full attention of everybody on the ground. They're now totally focused on, trying to shoot this thing down or trying to make sure it doesn't hit them. Singular focus. And both sides, I think, get off on that. I mean, I think it's an empowering thing for a drone operator to watch guys on the ground panic because you have a drone flying around that can kill them. Hezbollah today is very mature in their drone operations. The videos you see right now show a patience, a maturity, knowledge of the Israeli operations. It's just been fascinating to watch the growth of this happening. The Hezbollah has become a very sophisticated operator of FPV drones, which, as we're seeing, are some of the most impactful weapons on the battlefield today. Because the Israelis, it's the same thing that happens. The Israelis were doing their traditional infantry armor assaults on fortified Hezbollah positions, and Hezbollah fights back in traditional ambushes. And it's very costly for the Israelis. So the Israelis are pulling back, but there is no safe zone. That's the beauty of the drones. The drones take the battlefield where, the force on force area, the red zone, and they extend it back. And I think the Hezbollah FPV drones are operating up to 20 kilometers deep. In Russia and Ukraine, they're going 50, 60 kilometers deep in some cases. And if Hezbollah can start projecting FPV drones 60 kilometers into Israel, Israel's going to have a big problem because there will be no safe zone. This is one of the things that's happened in Russia. People say, why are the Russians so slow? Well, gosh, guys, why don't you try fighting in drone warfare? You don't get to drive your logistics up to the front lines, offload, and go into combat anymore. You're offloading 15 kilometers shy, and then the troops have to move in on foot or come in with light vehicles to escape the drone blanket, and come in there. You can't mass troops anymore because mass troops invites drone activity. And so the whole war has been broken down into little penny packet combat activities taken across a broad front, which the Russians are winning, but it takes more time. Israel is going to find out right now that it can't sustain frontline combat with Hezbollah anymore because to generate the force creates opportunities for FPV drones. And then, in order to get that force up there, you've got to go through a 20-kilometer highway of death. There's southern Lebanon. It's not like a wide network. There's only a handful of traffic corridors that the Israelis can operate on, and if those traffic corridors start being interdicted by Hezbollah drones, the Israelis have a problem. And these videos prove that.
Scott, before coming to this live, before starting this live, I was watching one of these Iranian commanders talking to Friday prayers in Iran. He said the question on the part of Iranians is not if the United States is going to attack or not. The question is, what would be the sort of attack? The attack is going to be assassination again, or they're going to attack with some sort of invasion, or they're going to start attacking, infrastructures in Iran. And this is the calculation on the part of Iranians. And when it comes to Netanyahu, I'm sure, because he said that in 60 Minutes in this interview, he said that he wants the continuation of the war. But what is your understanding and the reality of the continuation of the war? Because Donald Trump is going to get back on Friday. He's going to be in China. He's going to get back on Friday. If he wants to start the war, it's going to be on Saturday, Sunday, which is, the market is closed and he can start the war. And what do you make of it?
Let's preface this by pointing out that before Donald Trump went to China, somebody else went to China. I think his name was Arakchi, and I think he's the foreign minister of Iran. He also went to Russia and met with Vladimir Putin. And, one of the messages that apparently Arakchi gave to Putin, who then gave it to Trump in a 90-minute phone call, was the consequences of renewal of major kinetic activity against Iran. I don't know the details of it, and it hasn't been spelled out, but my understanding, reading the tea leaves, and you can correct me if you're wrong. If I'm about to say anything that you're like, no, Scott, that's not what's happening, please, because I'm reading tea leaves, and that's never the best way to do it. I'd like to hear it straight up. But the Iranians, I believe, have put the Gulf Arab states on notice: Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia, that their major energy producing infrastructure will be eradicated on day one if the United States begins that. So right off the bat, Iran has said we're eliminating energy production capability in the Gulf Arab states if the United States strikes our energy targets. So there's that. Now we have an additional thing. I think the Iranians are also saying we can cut the internet for the Gulf Arab states. We can cut these cables anytime we want to. And they've deployed submarines to that effect, the small Gwadar class submarines. So there's that. Iran can hit desalination plants, eliminate the water production capacity of the Gulf Arab states as we're getting into the hot months with no rainfall. There's that. I think Aragchi told this to the Chinese as well. And I think Donald Trump's going to be put on notice that that's just not an option. There's, if you do this, the economic consequences you're going to pay are going to be outrageous, and we'll be paying them too. So let's not do that. There is and the other problem is sustainability. Okay, so we start a fight with the Iranians. Let's say that we shipped enough long-range standoff weapons where we can, resume our previous pace of operations. That went for 37 days. I think the best guess right now is that we'll run out of ammunition in less than a week. So we got a week's worth of bombing. So we're going to accomplish in a week what we couldn't accomplish in 37 days. People say the targeting's better. Wait, the best targeting was the targeting we used on day one of the attack. And we ended up killing 165 schoolgirls. So there is no military solution. The other thing is we're just out of interceptor missiles. I mean, we've stripped everything bare. We've brought it in. The Iranians will flood the zone. We'll deplete our stocks. The Gulf Arab states will deplete their stocks. And then we'll just be sitting ducks for an Iranian ballistic missile force that has gotten stronger, not weaker over time. And I think this will be told to Donald Trump. So those who say that, there could be a resumption of military action on Saturday, if I were betting, I'd say, no, that doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. Of course, we're dealing with a madman in the president, literally an insane individual. I get a lot of pushback on that. People don't realize that I've actually been studying this issue for some time now. In 2019, I attended a conference that was televised on C-SPAN of psychiatrists and psychologists, board certified, head by Bandy Lee, a doctor from Harvard Medical, I think Harvard Medical. And they were making the case that Donald Trump was a malignant narcissist and that he manifested in a mental illness. Now, at that time, I pushed back. And I said, first of all, the Goldwater rule says you can't make a long-distance diagnosis, so what the hell are you doing? And, Donald Trump isn't that. Donald Trump's just a guy with an ego. He's a narcissist like almost every politician is, but to say malignant narcissism, Well, Bandy Lee and her colleagues have been vindicated. 100%. This man is mentally ill. The proof is in the pudding. It's there for everybody to see. He's not a president. He's a cult of personality. I just came back from Washington, D.C. That son of a bitch drapes his image over buildings as if he's some sort of god or, all looming Caesar face there. Donald Trump looking down on you. That's not what this country's supposed to be about. This is a man who tries to bribe senators to get his name on tunnels and railroads and airports. Why? Because it's a cult of personality. So we don't know how he's going to respond. It's very difficult as a geopolitical analyst or a military analyst or an energy security analyst to think logically when we have to deal with the mentally ill because they don't think logically. But in case he has a moment of coherence in China, I think he's going to be told that there is no military solution, that you can't win what you're about to start. In fact, it'll only get worse for you. And I think Donald Trump one of the ways that the narcissism plays in favor of a peaceful outcome is hopefully people are telling him, Mr. President, your legacy is on the line here. This isn't just about a defeat against Iran. We're talking about your political defeat at the polls in November that could lead to the demise of everything you've worked for. That the Trump brand will be torn down. There will be no Trump going forward. You will be eradicated from the history of the United States. And maybe that's enough to get him to say, well, maybe let's seek peace and to change. I think he's playing a hard game. Donald Trump has a tendency to come in hard and then back off. He's not very good at the bully road. He got lucky in Venezuela. Frankly speaking, he got very lucky. That CH-47 or MH-47 should have been shot down and everybody in it should have been killed. Instead, a brave pilot completed the mission and they were able to do it. But imagine if that helicopter had gone down and 30 to 40 Delta guys died with it. Where would we be? A whole different world. So he got lucky in Venezuela and his luck ran out against Iran. So, this is a man who there is no military solution. He needs a political solution. And I think the Chinese and the Russians are going to work with him to give him that. They're not going to do it directly. Of course, that's not how diplomacy works. But look, we know Vladimir Putin's a very smart man. We know, if you listen to his Victory Day speech, how he was stroking the ego of Donald Trump. Because he knows that's how it's just smart politics. And I think Xi Jinping, look, there's a lot that can be said by China right now about America, about American policy. And if you notice, the Chinese have been relatively silent going into this week. They're not, they're pulling their punches. They're not coming in for the knockout blow because they recognize the necessity of a broker to deal. And they want to be in a position to broker that deal. And you do that by working with Donald Trump, not against Donald Trump.
I think the response of Iran to the proposal, to the U.S. proposal, which Donald Trump said it took 4 days to respond, but basically, they needed less than 10 minutes to prepare that document. And this shows the timeline on the side of Iranians and the timeline on the side of Donald Trump. They're not just matching each other. And when it comes to Scott, because looking at what Iran is talking about, putting an end to the war on all fronts, sanctions, frozen assets, it's not in the hand of the US president. That's why I think they're talking this way. They want something, if they reach some sort of agreement between two countries, not two presidents, because they had that failed experience with the United States, with JCPOA. They had it signed by the President of the United States, Barack Obama, and then Donald Trump withdrew from the JCPOA because it wasn't ratified by the Congress. This is the mindset right now in Iran for those people who are hoping to have some sort of agreement with the United States.
Yeah.
What is your understanding of that?
I'll go off of Sergei Lavrov's comments. The United States is agreement incapable. So if Iran is seeking that kind of agreement, it's never going to happen, not under Donald Trump, and frankly speaking, not under any Democratic leadership. The United States, it's not just the president that's agreement incapable. The United States is agreement incapable. That's just a reality. So the best Iran's going to get is a deal, and that deal in 75 cents, I guess not even 75 cents anymore, $7.50 gets you a cup of coffee. That America's word is not its bond anymore. We're a nation of liars, cheats, we deceive. But people will make a deal when desperate. So the best Iran can hope for is a deal of desperation from an American president. But if Iran's waiting for America institutionally to rise up and do the right thing, it's not going to happen. We're agreement incapable. The deep state has populated the decision-making centers in America with people who believe in the nobility of American hegemony, the inevitability of American domination. We are the indispensable nation, and people still believe this nonsense. And they don't understand that the world's seeing through it. I mean, there's no more facade. There was a time, as Mike Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister, noted in his speech at Davos, where the world played along with the rules-based international order. But he said, we always knew it was fake. We always knew it was just about the America, using us to position itself to be a global, dominant leader. But as long as we got the crumbs thrown our way, we went along with it because it appeased us. It made us feel happy. But Canada has called it out. They know who we are. Europe knows who we are. All of our friends, ostensible friends, know who we are. And we're the worst nation in the world when it comes to integrity, honor, commitment. We can't be trusted. And yet, you have to deal with us. I was asked by a Russian, how do you deal with America? If America's agreement incapable, do you ignore America? Well, let me ask you this question. How do you deal with the weather? Do you ignore it? You can't ignore the weather. It's there. When it rains, you put on a raincoat. When it's hot, you dress in layers and you deal with that. When it's cold, you put on a coat. America is the weather. Unpredictable, ever changing, sometimes stormy, sometimes not. But you can't have an agreement with the weather. The weather will not adhere to any agreement. The weather will break every agreement because the weather's incapable of having an agreement. There's the United States. We're global weather. And people just have to deal with this right now. And I think Iran's going to have to adjust to that. I mean, I understand where the Iranians are coming from. I understand their inherent disdain for the United States because we have violated everything. Not just violated, Nima, you know this. We committed perfidy. We said, let's have an agreement. And while we were talking about agreement, we bombed twice. So, I know where the Iranians are coming from. I'm just giving you my honest assessment. If you think you're going to get an institutionalized agreement out of the United States, you're not right now. We're agreement incapable. The best you're going to get is a deal of desperation. And at this point in time, I think China and Russia are willing to accept that. I mean, China, there's a little bit of desperation in China right now because they need this energy to get flowing again so that their economic machine isn't disrupted. They don't need a recession. They don't need a depression. They need to continued growth. And now's the time for continued growth because you're looking at opportunities, global opportunities, emerge everywhere around the world. And China really is the only economic power capable of, meeting these demands. This is their chance. This is their moment. But they need the Strait of Hormuz to be opened up.
Scott, how do you see the future of GCC countries? The way that, because they have two ways, to understand the reality, the new reality of this, the Middle East, the Strait of Hormuz, the Persian Gulf, or you get closer to Israel, the position of Israel. What is your understanding of GCC countries and the way they're behaving? We see some sort of fracture, some sort of difference happening. UAE together with Kuwait and Bahrain on one side and Saudi Arabia, Qatar and Oman maybe on the other side. And is that the same way in your assessment?
Yeah, with UAE being the worst of the worst. I mean, they actually allowed Israeli troops on their soil with Iron Dome during the last conflict. So they become an extension of Israel into the Persian Gulf. So the UAE is Israel. And, I don't know, Kuwait, they can sit there and posture what they want. Kuwait's literally got zero negotiating position. They don't have a military at all. They're not generating any income. Last month they shipped zero. Qatar is bad. I mean, their LNG is shut down, been damaged. It's going to take a long time to get up and running. And so they need peace, but they have Al Udeid Air Base. They have to deal with that reality. Bahrain, poor little tiny Bahrain. They've not just have a unpopular, tyrant as their leader, a Sunni, but they have a Shia majority that could very well rise up, and nobody wants that in the Gulf Arab countries. Saudi Arabia, we now, interesting, statements or article by Prince Turki, the former head of intelligence, talking about the role of Israel and pushback by Saudi Arabia. There is no unity amongst the GCC countries. I think the GCC as an institution is finished. You're already seeing, there's always been long animosity between Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates that's manifested itself in, geopolitical contests on the African continent. The United Arab Emirates has been exposed as a nation that is hypocritical as the day is long. The genocide that they supported in Sudan and elsewhere, is only matched by the genocide that their new ally Israel commits against fellow Arabs, the Palestinians. So the future of the GCC, I think, is very stark. First of all, we just need to recognize that none of them are democratic countries. None of them. That they all have these royal families that had been given the throne by British imperialists, and they're still beholden in many ways to Britain and to the United States for their security. They're people who have no legitimacy other than the fact that they have a lot of money that's generated from the wealth of their resources that allows them to create little bubbles of wealth that foreign investors, expatriates, and locals find attractive, but they're not good people. At the end of the day, many of them aren't. I'm not saying all of them are bad, but I'm saying that none of them live in the world of reality. None of them know what hard work is. None of them know what it means to, you have to be responsible with your budget. These are people on a whim that can fly to London in a 747, stay in the best hotels, and go shopping and come back and not even blink about it. They don't live in the same world as we do, and they've been able to build up this artificial bubble of wealth and significance under an American umbrella of security that no longer exists. And I think they're waking up to the fact, everybody but the United Arab Emirates, although I think they know what the reality is, but they're so heavily committed to the Israel-American axis that they can't pull back. But the other GCC countries are, I think they're waking up to the reality that the world has changed and it's not going back to the way it was. And that if they're going to survive, if these, political and economic elites are going to stay in power, they're going to have to adapt to this new reality. And that new reality is that Iran is here, Iran is not going away, and that they're going to have to learn how to live in peace and harmony with Iran. Maybe not best friends, but not enemies either. And that the role played by the United States must be diminished or eliminated altogether, that the day and age of American military infrastructure dominating the region is over. That in order to move forward with Iran, that you're going to have to send the American military packing. So that's what I think is happening right now. And it's very interesting to see the role that Saudi Arabia is going to play in this. But it's also interesting to see what role Turkey is going to play. People have to remember that Turkey has close relationships with the Qataris. And Turkey is a regional player as well. So there's a big Turkish military presence in Qatar. So they're there. But I just think it's a brave new world right now in the Persian Gulf, one where Iran is dominant. And you have all these people right now that refuse to acknowledge that. I mean, the president calls anybody who recognizes reality a traitor, treasonous. And then you have a bunch of think tanks. I mean, look at Robert Kagan. He wrote a big article in the Atlantic that says, checkmate Iran, making it sound like Iran did everything right. But his solution isn't to work with Iran to create a better world. His solution is a bigger war. A bigger war. There's not going to be a bigger war. Where are the troops going to come from? In order to generate the 1.2 to 2 million strong army America would need to actually physically occupy Iran, if that could even be done, we don't have that military. We'd have to go into conscription, and the American people aren't, I don't think, ready to die to invade Iran. For what purpose? Why? It hasn't been articulated. It's not as though Iran carried out a Pearl Harbor attack against the United States. We carried out the Pearl Harbor attack against them. So I think it's a new world, and the GCC countries are going to have to adapt to this world And I don't think the GCC is long for this world, because you can't speak of a GCC whose existence is predicated on opposing Iran continuing to exist when Iran. It's like saying NATO can exist and have good relations with Russia. It's impossible. NATO will never be able to have good relations with Russia. So if Europe wants to have better relations with Russia, NATO has to go away. And if the Gulf Arab states want to have better relations with Iran, the GCC has to go away.
Yeah. You remember Russia, one of the main objectives of Russia in this war in Ukraine was to reach a security architecture for the region. They're basically, China and Russia together with Iran, they're talking about a new security architecture for the Persian Gulf. And do you see it would be the same way that we've been witnessing with the case of Russia, which, one party doesn't want to participate in that sort of security architecture, which I'm talking about Europeans. They're not willing to, cooperate with Russia to reach that sort of agreement. But how is that gonna, putting that case of Russia aside, how is that gonna get these countries in the Persian Gulf coming together and having a new security architecture? Is that going to happen, in your opinion?
Well, first of all, I think you say put aside Russia, but we can't. We have to start with Russia and Russia's relationship with Europe. Your assessment of Europe not being prepared is dated.
Yeah.
Because right now, as we speak, Europe's getting strangled economically because of the energy.
Exactly.
Yeah. And what we see more and more is Europe saying, we got to learn how to talk with Russia. And you have Europeans saying, we have no choice but to talk about how we can get back on, and start getting Russian energy flowing in. It's required for our survival.
They're literally dying, the conflict in the middle.
Yeah. So now we have the Gulf Arab nations. And it's sort of they don't need Iranian oil, but they need Iran to give them permission to sell their oil, to sell their energy. They're dying. They have no future. And they're going to have to do business with Iran. This is the thing. There is no alternative. They can choose a path of confrontation where they seek regime change in Iran, but that's already been tried and it failed. Then, Iran is on a different level of escalation management now. They manage their escalation up to the point of no return. But the next time this war starts, I think Iran crosses the point of no return and eliminates the Gulf Arab states as, economically and politically viable, nations. And I think the Gulf Arab states are starting to recognize this reality. And therefore, there is the absolute necessity of normalizing relations with Iran under a new paradigm, a new security architecture. So I think, in a way, Europe and the Middle East are both facing the same harsh reality. How do you adapt to a world where the United States is no longer present and no longer capable of providing the security guarantees that it once did, around which you built everything? Now you have to take responsibility for security. And by doing so, can you sustain the hostile posture that Europe, for instance, has against Russia and the Gulf Arab states have against Iran? The answer is no, you can't. You're going to have to learn how to, de-escalate and work in peaceful harmony with Russia in the case of Europe, or Iran in the case of the Gulf Arab states.
You've mentioned that Donald Trump is not going to get any sort of agreement, or he's not capable of making a new agreement with Iran, but you believe that he may get a deal with Iran. What does that mean for the United States and for Donald Trump himself, as he's headed toward the midterm elections in the United States? And we know what's the tone, what's the understanding of American people right now.
Well, understanding that, as I said before, it's impossible to accurately describe what's going on inside the brain of Donald Trump. And you can't really answer that question unless you know what's going on inside his brain. And B, I don't pretend to speak on behalf of the Iranian nation. I mean, they get to make their final decisions. And I've heard Iranian officials say, we're not here to create a politically viable off-ramp for Donald Trump. Because that's something I've been saying, and I continue to say, that the only way this war comes to an end is if people make it politically possible for Donald Trump to declare some sort of victory. Now, what are the what are the two issues that are the most important right now? Nuclear and Strait of Hormuz. On the nuclear, I think the key here is for Donald Trump to be able to tell the American people that the pathway for an Iranian bomb has been closed permanently, and the deal that the Omani government had been able to help facilitate, negotiate as of February 26th, did just that. And that means that from a purely political standpoint, the president is going to say he got a better deal than Barack Obama did, and that's a political victory. So I think anything Iran can do to make the February 26th agreement reality, and there may have to be some other things. I first of all, we don't know the total details of what was in February 26th, but I do think that Iran shipping the 60% enriched uranium out of Iran to a non-U.S. party, let's call it Russia, is the path forward. The Iranians right now seem to be reticent, not supporting that, but that's because they don't want to be seen as caving into the threats of the United States. But if this issue is pitched a different way, perhaps with a middleman, Russia or China or both, pitching it, and the president is told maybe don't declare victory till after the deal is consummated, I think you can solve the nuclear problem. I don't think it's an insurmountable issue, regardless of what the president says. I think it's actually one of the more easily resolved issues. Strait of Hormuz is more complicated because Iran can't give up the control that it now manifested, because that is the key to their deterrence against continued conflict. But it's very difficult to imagine any peace agreement where the world and the Gulf Arab states allow themselves to be held hostage by the whim of Iran. So I think there's a compromise there. This is where I think the Chinese will step in, offer certain reconstruction incentives for Iran, work with the United States to get sanctions lifted, not in the long term, but in the short term, to get frozen assets unfrozen quickly, and in exchange to have Iran agree to some sort of joint stewardship of the Hormuz Strait with maybe Oman, which they've already talked about. Some sort of compromise there where it's not 100% Iranian controlled, where there's a joint thing and it's based upon, even though the United States is agreement incapable, I do think that China can create an agreement within the GCC states and Iran regarding the implementation of some sort of deal with the Strait of Hormuz. And if you solve those two problems, everything else resolves itself, because Iran doesn't can insist on having U.S. bases. That creates a political problem. But the reality is the U.S. isn't going to be able to keep their bases in the region because they've been blown up. And for these other states to be part of this Hormuz project, maybe you can't have military bases on your soil or something of that nature. So I think the United States footprint will be reduced significantly, which again is one of the Iranian demands. When it comes to sanctions being lifted, I think you're going to see the nuclear sanctions go away. I think it's going to be the missile sanctions might stay in place. One of those unspoken things where we don't talk about them getting rid of their missiles, but we're not going to reward them. Some sort of compromise there, but it'll go away over time, because I think in the long term, what the Russians and the Chinese are going to tell the Iranians is the closer you embrace us, the more difficult you make it for Israel and the United States to resume military operations down the road. If you want a security guarantee, then pivot to the east, embrace, and start investing, start becoming part of that system. And you'll make it impossible for the United States and Israel to talk about resuming conflict. And once you get the Gulf Arab states to agree to peaceful coexistence with Iran, you undermine the Abrams Accord, which means now Israel's in a huge problem. It's like, going to buy a new house thinking you had a collateral to put up for it, finding you have no collateral. The Abrams Accord is the collateral for Greater Israel. The potential of economic development and prosperity. When that shuts down, there is no more economic prosperity, no more economic development. And Israel's not talking about sustaining Greater Israel. It's about surviving as Israel currently exist? Is that even possible without the Abrams Accord? And I think the answer is no. But this is, I think there's a grand bargain to be made there. I also think that the United States and Russia, that Russia stepping in to help out the United States will put more pressure on Ukraine and the European nations to accept terms that will be acceptable to Russia, and Trump will get a twofer. And that's the other way you sell it to the American people is I broke the global paradigm. I helped resolve the Iranian problem that nobody else has been able to do so. And I also get credit now for bringing an end to the war with Russia. Because that's all the malignant narcissist wants is credit, to be honest. To stroke his ego. He doesn't care about, he's not smart enough to understand the substance. Stroke his ego. I'm all in favor of that right now if it brings about a just and equitable peace for Iran and for the region.
Scott, as we talk, we know that Lavrov is in India. He just arrived in India, and Arakchi gonna be there. The foreign ministers of BRICS countries gonna, have a meeting there on May 14 to May 15, 2 days of meeting. And when it comes Donald Trump, you remember that Donald Trump was so much concerned about dollar and the future of dollar. And right now with the new war in the Middle East, I don't see, I see these BRICS countries coming together the way that they need some sort of alternative. They have to do something about it. And how do you see BRICS finding its way? Because we have all these countries together. We know the differences among these countries, and they're not perfect. But they understand perfectly their differences, as we saw with the case of Russia and India during the war in Ukraine, as we saw with the case of Iran and India during the war between Iran and the United States. India somehow been tricky toward Russia, toward Iran, but after all, they're part of BRICS. And you don't see any sort of tension between Russia and India, between Iran and India, because the states, the two governments perfectly understand the position of the other. And these countries are getting together. What is the BRICS? What is the future of BRICS? And how do they see a better future for the peace and prosperity of the countries who are part of BRICS?
BRICS has great potential. There's no doubt about that. But Donald Trump is openly hostile against BRICS, and the United States still retains the ability to move the global economic and geopolitical needle. And so Venezuela was just to take Venezuela off the board. Venezuela was courting BRICS membership. That's been eliminated. It's a message to Brazil about the dominance of the United States. And then this whole, the idea to, get rid of Iran and a BRICS member and replace it with a government friendly to the United States, to isolate Russia, to break up Russia and China, and to keep India more on the side of the West than on the side of the East. Trump has been working really hard overtime to kill BRICS. And I have to say, before the Iran war, he was doing a pretty good job. He was making it complicated for BRICS to grow and mature the way that many of the world leaders who were part of BRICS had envisioned. But today, BRICS is an extremely viable thing. A key to it, of course, is the continued survival of Iran. And I think that what you're seeing in these meetings is the BRICS nations coming together to view Iran as a pathway towards their collective relevance. Whether or not they're going to be able to resolve the dollar issue, I'm not a smart enough economist to answer that question. I just will point out some basic things that I focus on. And again, Michael Hudson out there and all the smart people out there might say, well, Scott, you're not focused on the right thing. I accept that. My resume does not say world-renowned economist. But I am a world-renowned guy who owns dollars. What I know about the dollar is that when we linked it to the petrodollar, we pumped more dollars out there than anybody else in the world. In fact, our entire system, the way the global economy works, is premised on the petrodollar. Now, people keep saying they want to replace the petrodollar with cause. With cause. With what? What nation's out there willing to sacrifice all of the rational, economic stability that they've imparted through structures and discipline, and say, "Oh, screw it, we're just going to start printing yuan or rupees or rubles. Just print them, because that's how you have a petrodollar. You just print dollars." The Chinese aren't ready for that. No one's ready for that. There is no currency in the world that can do that. Now, you can have localized relations where you trade currencies, and we see that right now. Iran is doing that with yuan and all that. But there's a limit, there's a cap, because there's only a finite amount of those currencies available, and those nations aren't in the business of just hitting printing presses anymore, or they never have been. So I think one of the things that Russia and China are looking for is to bring stability back into the global economic system, which means that the dollar will be retained for the moment as the global reserve currency. Now, other nations can offset that with baskets of currencies and things of that nature, but I don't think anybody is ready to have an absolute replacement for the dollar. And until you're ready to replace the dollar, you have to learn to deal with the dollar. And this is, again, why I think the meetings with Xi, and the interesting thing now is there's actually talk about a meeting between Putin and Trump before the year's over. That there's whispers of this kind of thing happening. I think we're seeing the United States, because of the loss in Iran, having to readjust its global ambitions. First of all, we need the petrodollar to survive. Our economy is absolutely, we can't survive without it. It would lead to total collapse of the dollar. And nobody in the world wants that. As much as people hate the United States, you need to understand we are the largest economy in the world. I mean, the world will not function without our economy. All right, that doesn't mean that we're the driver. China,
which the regime of sanctions is destroying that, as we talk.
Of course it is. The sanctions is horrible. It's stupid. It's suicidal. It's dumb. It's crazy. I agree. I'm not defending the regime of sanctions. I'm saying that the world isn't seeking to destroy the American economy. Trump presidency is seeking to destroy the American economy through tariffs and sanctions. I think you're going to see a normalization of that because of this, because we need stability right now. We're not the Trump can't back up the arrogant posture that the national security strategy was putting forward, and Scott Bessent has been trying to project economically. We can't do that. We're going to have to learn to get along with nations. Again, we're agreement incapable because I would never trust the United States at this point in time. Don't ever let your guard down. But the point is, reality dictates solutions. And the current reality is that the American vision of continued hegemony is dashed. We don't have the military ability to sustain that, the economic prowess to sustain that. And we no longer have the ability to leverage threats of American physical violence or economic violence into achieving outcomes that we dictate. We're going to have to work with the world. As imperfect as it is to work with America, that's just the reality. This Chinese trip, all eyes should be on it, because this is the first test of whether or not Donald Trump is capable of adjusting to new realities. I mean, if he comes out of China and has achieved nothing, that's a signal that the United States is incapable of not just reaching an agreement, but even conceiving an agreement. That conceptually Trump is unable to adjust his narcissistic worldview to reality. So it'll be interesting to see. But the meeting in India right now, I think is, again, remember, as much as America's trying to adjust to these realities, the world's adjusting to this new reality too. It's a brave new world out there. This time, 3 months ago, no one was talking about, America, being powerless. I mean, everybody's talking about Taiwan, they were saying, well, American carrier battle group, the American think they're going to do this, that, and the other thing. But there was always a little question in people's mind. Could America pull it off? I mean, big military. Today, there's just no debate. We don't have the capacity to pull it off. Europe is no longer talking about, American air power being dominant. We recognize that there are limitations to American air power, especially when we expend all of our long-range standoff munitions. So Europe is now, talking about how to go it alone. What's going to happen to AUKUS? What's going to happen to the Quad? What's going to happen to the tripartite agreement with South Korea, Japan, and the United States now that we stripped all of the air defense systems out of there? We just told the Japanese, one of their big things was the ability to guarantee to strike back. If they were struck by North Korea, to have their own capability to strike back. And this was premised on 400 Tomahawk missiles that they were buying from the United States. And we just told them, no, you ain't getting them. And the entire Japanese strategy was built around that. Now they have to reconsider it. The world has to adjust. America's ostensible friends and allies have to adjust, but the people in opposition to the United States have to adjust. And I think that's what's going on in India right now, is the great adjustment. But, you seem more optimistic about India than I am. I am not optimistic about India because I don't think India hasn't made a strategic decision yet. Remember, India was in Israel making kamikaze with the Israelis right before this war started. That doesn't sit well. And India is problematic when it comes to China and Pakistan. I mean, I think Pakistan is one of the great superstars of this crisis. The leadership that Pakistan has shown, the maturity that Pakistan has shown, the ability of Pakistan to work with the United States, with China, with Russia, with Iran, and others to create the potential for a diplomatic solution. If ever there was, an entity that deserved the Nobel Peace Prize, if this conflict can be brought to an end, I think the Pakistani leadership deserves collectively the Nobel Peace Prize for the role they played in making peace possible, because it's amazing what they've done. Superb diplomacy. But, India is problematic. I mean, India is a problem child. It's big, it's powerful, but they don't know where they want to be in the world. And as long as India is indecisive like that, now maybe this meeting will, be the beginning of India's, transition to being serious about BRICS. But right now, India is not serious about BRICS. Not serious at all. India is more serious about, G20 viability and, hoping against hope to get an invitation into the G7, which will never happen. India's also continues to lobby for relevance at the Security Council, and they feel they need the United States support to get that. So India is putting far too much weight on a relationship with the United States that's no longer globally relevant. The bottom line is India's future must be with repairing relations with China and turning BRICS into a formidable, viable international economic forum.